Is what it is.
What else can you do?
Well, you could talk about a comic culture moment. What do you got for us today?
We could. Well, listen. It's not only Valentine's Day coming up soon, but it is also Oscar season.
I
And
love the Grouch.
not that Oscar.
Not that
Not
Oscar.
that Oscar.
Nope.
No,
What are we
not
talking
that
about?
Oscar. Although in the last couple of years, I would say that Oscar is preferable to the award show that I'm talking about.
I think he says what we all feel.
Go away, scram.
Yeah.
My son has a little Oscar figurine that he constantly brings up to me and makes me impersonate Oscar, and he wants me to tell him to go away and scram.
All right. Well, now it's time. You open the can. I want your Oscar impersonation.
Go away, scram. Thank you.
I mean, the dude lives in a garbage can. Of course he's pissed off.
You know, there was one time, I don't know how we got, I don't know how we got on the Sesame Street track, but there was a point in Sesame Street where they made a big deal about introducing the first unhoused Muppet as like a main character.
As
and
if
it was
it's
like
not Oscar?
It was like this little kid, and I was like, excuse me, put some respect on Oscar the Grouch's name. That guy's been living in a garbage can since the 60s, so let's be real here.
Oscar deserves more. Hashtag
Justice for Oscar.
Justice for Oscar. Not what we're talking about. We are talking about the awards ceremony, the Oscars.
We are. And now I will say, before I jump in, there have been some exceptions to what I'm going to say.
Okay.
But for the most part, I think that movies like comic book movies, big science fiction movies, big fantasy movies, a lot of movies that you would see in the geek realm don't get the fair recognition that I feel like is deserved by some of these major award shows like Golden Globes, Oscars. You know, they're always saved for the Fangoria Awards or the Saturn Awards and all these kind of left of center ones. Now, I know that, The Dark Knight and Joker were both nominated for Best Actor. I know that Suicide Squad and Doctor Strange had been nominated for costumes and effects. I know the Black Panther was nominated for Best Picture, and that was really cool. And those are all great, but I think that for the most part, you have these really epic movies, and they're not always good, but sometimes there are movies that create this achievement in storytelling or tell a really compelling story or have really fine performances in them and then just don't get the recognition. And I think it's because people brush them aside as just, it's like a popcorn movie. It's just entertainment. That's not film. That's just, you're watching people in spandex fight other people in spandex, and there's explosions and lasers and flying. And I mean, you're not wrong. All that stuff is a part of it, but I think that it's unfair to kind of dismiss them as really great cinematic experiences when they are that, or really great achievements or performances. So why do you think that the public as a whole, even if they embrace these movies to watch and enjoy them, refuse to kind of give them the credit that they're due sometimes with these prestigious awards?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I love the topic. The word that comes to mind is apocalypse, and not the DC apocalypse, but just the word. Right? When we hear that word, we think like end of the world, destruction, things like that. Well, the actual term means the great unveiling. Okay. And we are living in a great apocalypse right now, particularly from COVID. A lot of things have just been unveiled for what they really are. There's a huge distrust in the government. There's a huge awakening of UFOs. Everybody's sort of skeptical of Hollywood. And I think that trend does apply to even our media and our cinematic experiences. And I think up until maybe 2016, 2018, everybody sort of looked at superhero movies, particularly the Scorseses and the Spielbergs, the people who have been doing film for a long time. They looked at those as though they were the Westerns. Mm-hmm. That this is a fad, it's going to go away, we're not going to worry about it too much, but it's not really film. In the same way you wouldn't necessarily think like a spaghetti western is a real film. Something like The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. Yeah, it's got Clint Eastwood, but it's not to be taken seriously. It's not the height of dramatic expression and artistic achievement, blah, blah, blah. Well, when the superhero movie didn't just go away, in fact, it blew up with things like Infinity War, Justice League, Endgame, stuff like that, I think the industry as a whole had to decide, what is cinema? Is it the Godfathers and the Jaws and the Jurassic Parks, where there's compelling artistry and visual effects coupled with a really good story? Or are they sort of this popcorn narrative that just gets to come up and you know, be here one moment and gone the next? Is it a fleeting thing, or is it something that stands the test of time? All of this has now unveiled what we really think about cinema. And that comes to the head when you talk about awards. When you're discussing awards, you're like, look, this thing gets a gold star because of its achievement. And everybody in the comic community is going, well, this is that achievement too. But the gatekeepers of that, the historical filmmakers, are going, no. I busted my rear end for all this time working on a script and a story and the right actor and the right costumes and all this stuff. You guys churned this out with no thought and, you know, half a comic book page worth of content, and you're asking for the same recognition. That's what's underneath it. And I think that's the tension underneath. If you're asking me personally, I think there's space for both. I think you can do both. I think there's something so compelling about a Schindler's List, but there's also something beautiful about Endgame. And you can have both at the table. But if you start deciding this goes in this category and this doesn't, well, now you're defining what is and is not art, which is a very dangerous game to play. And I really don't think that's really what's at the core of it. What you're really deciding is, does this art do what I intended it to do, regardless of the effort? And I think that's really what's underneath when you get an Oscar or a Golden Globe. And when we've segregated these things, I know I'm waxing poetic for a long time. When you segregate these things into, well, this is just an Emmy, or this is just an Oscar, or this is just a Grammy. When you segregate it, you're sort of stripping it away from the thing that made it noteworthy in the first place. So just recognize that people love it. Whether you give it an award or not is besides the point. Recognize that it's had a cultural moment, and then decide whether or not it deserves that Oscar based on other criteria. But to decide whether or not it is or is not worthy art, I think that's just lazy.